submit these applications, they're not going to know you personally. So
Yeah. Okay. I have gone live, so
Okay.
I think we can wait for roughly 2 minutes for people to start joining, and I will test on my phone to see if the live works properly on LinkedIn.
Cool.
So it's live on both LinkedIn and YouTube for Design Buddies.
All right, we'll just wait until some people trickle in. Ooh.
Okay, lovely.
Hi, everyone.
Oh, yeah, I can remove Bree then. Yeah. Wait, where's Daniel? Is Daniel supposed to be on stage too?
No, I think he's on the back end.
Cool. I gave the spotlight to the wrong people. Okay. Okay. Currently, I see people start to tune in for the live session on LinkedIn. So
For sure.
a bit more time. Yeah. Whenever you need to start, like just start it because it's recorded, so everyone can just see the presentation later. Yeah, it's gonna be
No worries. We can start. Yeah, we can start at like 7:02. I usually give it like a couple minutes for people to trickle in, and that's kind of how I timed myself for the presentation, anyways. And I'm not hurting for time anyway. I can go a little bit over time, especially if the questions are good. But thanks everyone for joining the live stream. We're going to give it a couple more minutes. We'll start the conversation at 7:02. And hopefully I can answer or at least help you guys out when it comes to talking about visas here in the United States.
Yeah. Hi, Kangsha. If everyone is tuning in already, would love to hear where you guys are tuning in from. I'm currently in San Francisco. It's pretty sunny here. How about you, Nicole?
I am in New York, and it is the opposite of sunny. It is dark already in New York. It is 7:01 p.m. right now.
Ooh.
And I will say that at the end of the day, I do love New York so much. As much as it's dark and a little bit gloomy, I love the winter, I love the cold, and I like the vibes, let's say.
Yeah. No, definitely there's a vibe to New York. I love walking around the streets. And even it looks like a Christmas wonderland when it's snowing.
That's true. Christmas in New York is kind of special. Fifth Avenue here with all the lights and all the spectacle. It's very, very different. And Rockefeller Center, of course.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. So I think we're at 7:02. I think we can get started. But again, thank you for having me here, Min. But let's start with the introductions.
Yeah, sure. So hi everyone. My name is Min, and I'm representing Design Buddies to host this live session on a topic that is very helpful, insightful for creatives who are international like me. And we have Nicole who gave a talk at our recent cohort internship demo day in Tech Week, and I truly learned a lot from that talk, even though it's really short. So today we're bringing it to the online audience, and hopefully you guys are gonna learn a lot from this experience. Yeah. So Nicole, take over and introduce yourself and get going.
For sure. Thank you, of course, Design Buddies and everyone for having me here. I'm more than happy to talk to all of you who are creatives presently in the United States or maybe outside of the United States, hoping to come to the US, because I think a lot of the times creatives feel that there might be no pathway or no opportunities. So I'm here to kind of give some light, give some opportunities or options that could be very helpful for all of you. Just to kind of give an overview of who I am, what to expect today and the like. For today's agenda, we're going to go over some of the US visa options for creatives, whether it's O1s, J1s, H1Bs, CAP exempt H1Bs, L1s, and country-specific options. We'll even talk about what freelancing looks like in the United States, along with working on side projects on different visas. And I will also say that there's visa-friendly things that you should be doing for a creative career and some common mistakes and how to avoid them. Just to briefly introduce myself, my name is Nicole Ganara. I am the principal immigration attorney at Manifest Law. Manifest Law is a tech-enabled, tech-forward immigration law firm. We are trying to redefine what legal practice looks like in 2026 onwards. A lot of my work has been in talent visas, in particular EB-1As, O-1s, business immigration generally, and I've also done a lot of investment-related visas. But I'm really here to advise people on how to build their futures here in the United States. So just to kind of get started, types of visas for creatives. One of the first things that I want to talk about, and many of you who are tuning in might already be on this visa, is the F1 visa. And before you tune out because it's like, oh, Nicole, I'm already on this, part of my conversation about student visas is actually going to tell you about how you should be leveraging them and some of the important rules to keep in mind. Because one of the downsides that I've seen, especially when I've worked with creatives who are already students, is compliance, right? If you fail compliance, if you miss a deadline, it can be extremely damaging. So at least stay tuned for this part of it so I can give you some really great crafty advice in terms of leveraging your F1 and maintaining that compliance, especially in the day and age where compliance is everything. So OPT. I think a lot of you who are on F1 already know about it. OPT is this period of time after you graduate where you're given about 12 months of work authorization, but it needs to be work that is directly related or at least substantially related to the major or academic pursuit that you have. There's a variety of employment types that can work on an OPT. You can work for a design firm, you can be in-house at a brand, or you can even be self-employed and or a freelancer. I think a lot of people who are an OPT don't realize that freelancing and self-employment is allowed. It's usually not something that is brought up by the DSOs because traditionally a lot of the students that are outside of the creatives focus a lot on finding that first job, working at Amazon, working at Meta, working at Apple. But there are ways to leverage that OPT period in order to do freelancing, which is very, very helpful for all of those of you who are working in design fields. So unlike other visas or unlike other kind of scenarios for work authorization, standard OPT allows you to juggle multiple clients so long as all of your work is related to your degree. I will also note that you should tell your DSO or your International Students Office that you're looking to do this because you do need to tell them what kind of freelancing you're anticipating on doing and the kinds of engagements that you have in front of you. Important note about OPT, about timing. Apply up to 90 days before graduation. I really tell people to apply earlier rather than later, especially given the timing considerations right now. I know that premium processing can be extremely expensive. So if you want to try to avoid premium processing, apply as early as possible. And you don't necessarily have to wait for your job offer. The EAD card or work permit can take time to process, but I also wrote this really quick rule for you guys to remember, 90, 60, 30. So 90 days before graduation is the earliest that you can file for your OPT. The 60-day rule is that you do have 60 days after you graduate in order to file that OPT request. And the 30-day rule is that you must file that request within 30 days of the OPT recommendation that was issued on your I-20. 90, 60, 30 is the golden rules for OPT. The other thing that I do want to talk about a lot is STEM OPT. I think some of the biggest pitfalls that a lot of designers encounter when they're trying to maintain their OPT status is they equate STEM OPT as the exact same as OPT, but STEM OPT is actually governed by different rules. So for example, STEM OPT allows for an additional 24 months of work authorization, which means 36 months total inclusive of your initial OPT for those who are specifically in STEM designated degrees. But the biggest question that I get from designers is design considered STEM, right? Many design programs are actually STEM designated. If you take a look online and you can just Google it, which is CIP codes or STEM degrees that apply for STEM OPT, you'd actually be surprised by how many design degrees are actually designated for this extension, and many designers don't even know. And it's not necessarily the obligation of the school to tell you that you have access to the STEM OPT. So please take a look online, do some research, go on your I-20 and take a look at your CIP code. You can actually quickly find out whether or not you are eligible for this timely extension. But there are stricter rules for STEM OPT. First of all, you can only work for an employer that is on E-Verify. It means that they need to have this special enrollment and designation that allows them to actually actively sponsor for individuals who are on this STEM OPT. So please check before you join the company, or please check before you actually file for the application. And there's also no such thing as true freelancing on the STEM OPT. It's very much possible that you could be working for a boutique design firm or a design firm that services many clients, but you can't be personally servicing multiple clients on your own or in your own business. You need to have a more traditional employee relationship in this context. So that's where things get tricky. If you did OPT to do a lot of freelancing opportunities, be mindful that if you decide to do this STEM OPT extension, that those freelancing opportunities cannot maintain and continue forward when you're trying to do this 24-month period. The timing is also different. And I know this sounds crazy, but unlike OPT, which has the 90, 60, 30-day rule, STEM OPT has the 90, 60-day rule. The earliest that you can file for the extension is 90 days prior to the end of your OPT. And it must always be filed before the end of your OPT. Unlike regular OPT, where you have this 30-day timeline after you graduate, 60-day timeline after you graduate, it doesn't exist for the STEM OPT. The other rule with STEM OPT is that you must file within 60 days of the issuance of your STEM OPT recommendation. Because if you don't, the government can say, hey, it was not filed properly or timely. So those were just my little tidbits about STEM OPT and OPT. When it comes to leveraging the OPT period, I do actually encourage a lot of designers to consider doing freelancing and then jumping into a normal job during their STEM OPT period. And you're going to find out a little bit more why, especially when I talk about O1s and a lot of the other visa categories, because what freelancing does is it adds a lot of visuals, or it adds a lot more to your resume because you've serviced so many different employers and different productions, right? So we'll talk about that a little bit more deeply, but that's usually the strategy that I tell a lot of students, especially when they're reaching towards graduation. But of course, there's caveats to that. Like if you get the best job of all time at Apple, please don't don't say no just because you want to do freelancing, unless it's great for you to do freelancing. So that actually leads me naturally towards the next visa that I want to talk about, which many of you would be most interested in. It's something known as the O1 visa for extraordinary ability. And the reason why many of you may be interested in this is because there's a lot of talk about the H-1B and how there's a lot of pressure by the government on kind of changing what the H-1B landscape really looks like. And the benefit of the O1 is that it's very much self-driven compared to relying on maybe a specific employer to get you out of this hole, and also relying on a lottery process, because an O1 can be applied for at any time. There is no limit to the number of O1s that are issued in a given year. With the H-1B, which is usually the most natural course of action for many of you that are out there, essentially the H-1B can be a little bit of a toss-up. You got to hope that you win that particular category. But the O1 visa is something that allows an individual who has achieved certain hallmarks within their career to get a special work visa. There's two types of O visas that are out there: O1B for the arts and O1As for business and science. The funniest thing is that whenever I've met a UI UX designer, or whenever I've met a product designer, they immediately go, oh, Nicole, I'm in an O1A. I have to do the business path, right? Because I do a lot of, let's say, and please forgive me, I'm not an SME in your field. I do some coding, or I do a lot of tech related stuff. I must be in O1A. But I actually find that what may be a more natural fit for a lot of designers is actually the O1B arts path, because a lot of the work that you do is creative. It is design ultimately deep down inside, right? So for a natural fit for most designers, the O1B focuses on creative output, visual systems, exhibitions, public-facing design. And when we talk about strategic shifts, we mean that you can reframe functional design like UX flows, Figma files as artistic endeavors. But that doesn't mean completely remove the O1A, right? The O1A can be very relevant for you, especially if you have a lot of achievements related to business impact, thought leadership, organizational leadership, a lot of publications, right? And I'm going to talk more deeply actually on the next slide about how you can decide between what's the better fit for you when it comes to your profile. But this is the one thing I have to emphasize to every single one of you. The benefit of being a designer, or the designer's advantage that I say, is that you guys actually have a unique flexibility. You often can actually qualify for both. It's just that one path can usually be greener or easier than the other, depending on what you have done during the time that you were in the United States, or even your career thus far. So there's this next slide, which is, what is the true difference? The true difference between the two visas, the O1A and the O1B, is actually the criteria that the government uses to assess whether or not you are extraordinary. Golden rule, guys, is that you need to meet at least 3 criteria for each of these visa categories. So for example, for the O1A, there's about 8 criteria that you can meet, and you need to meet at least 3 of them. For the O1B, it's about 6, and which you need to meet at least 3. For the O1A, you can see here, it is heavily catered to people in the sciences and traditional education and business. They're talking about winning awards, membership in organizations, press in the media about you, judging competitions in your field or an allied field, original contributions of major significance, authorship of scholarly articles like research publications, critical and essential roles at distinguished organizations, and high remuneration, right? Comparatively for O1Bs, and this is why naturally, if you were ever to work with me, to consult with me, I try to push designers towards the O1B category. The criteria for the O1B is a lot more flexible. So the first criteria is that you're a lead or starring participant in productions or events. So what does that mean for you as a designer? Remember how earlier when I was talking about OPT, you can freelance, right? You can work for different engagements, different initiatives, different campaigns. Those individual campaigns or individual initiatives can be productions in their own right. And you are a leading participant if you are like a lead designer or a very critical designer to those productions, right? So that's already one category that could be easier to fit if you have really great freelancing jobs, or you're working for a design firm that has multiple clients and you're working on each of those clients as individual products. So for example, if I am someone who is working for Meta as a creative strategist, but a lot of my work is doing collaborations between Meta and Ray-Ban, Meta and Fendi, Meta and all of these different organizations, I can break down those individual campaigns as individual productions that I was a lead participant on. That is a relevant argument that is quite unique to designers and creative strategists compared to, say, I'm a traditional scientist, right? The second thing that is a good criteria is recognition of achievements by critical reviews, published materials by or about you in major newspapers and journals. So this is actually similar to the O1A where they talk about press, right? But the biggest hallmark of the O1B and the distinguishment is that in the O1B, it says by or about you. So by means that you can actually write your own articles talking about your own work in publications that are out there. And it doesn't necessarily just have to be on major newspapers. If you've done a lot of advertising work, it could be on AdNet, it could be on Advertising Age, or it could be in publications that are very niche and very special within your own community. When I think about Design Buddies, right, you might not necessarily have a true publication, but this is a great network to be a part of because somebody out there is linked to a trade publication or some sort of design publication or podcast even that just covers a lot about design work that's happening today and provides insights. So you actually have more control within the O1B category than, say, the O1A. Next criteria is lead, starring, or critical role at distinguished organizations. Of course, this is when your time and STEM OPT can be helpful. If you're working for a specific organization, you can make that argument that you're having a critical role. If you're a lead designer or one of the main designers for a specific company, right, or a specific series of things, be sure to make the argument for this. Next category is record of major commercial or critically acclaimed successes. Another great one for designers. If the campaign that you worked on or if the project that you work on was ultimately financially successful or was really well reviewed or well received from the general public, talk about it. Talk about it. So I actually use this category a lot for graphic designers. Graphic designers who actually do a lot of work for Instagram content, right? Let's say it's like, hey, we're trying to communicate information better. We're trying to sell better online. And your work ends up pulling in more engagement and a high level engagement. Show that. That could be an argument for a record of commercially acclaimed successes because it was commercially very successful. Next is significant recognition from achievements from organizations, critics, government agencies, or other recognized experts. This is actually a category or criteria that for a lot of people seems very, very unachievable because it's like, when am I going to get recognition? What organizations, what critics, what agencies? But actually what the government actually can look for is testimonial letters. Design Buddies is actually a really great community for this, right? Find someone else who is of stature. Let's say there's someone in this community who is a lead designer now at Apple who is willing to mentor or willing to write you a recommendation letter that basically says, hey, when I look at your profile, you are someone that's really achieved. That's fantastic. Or if you're part of a community that awards you or recognizes some of the great work that you've done, that is also considered significant recognition. So this is where the O1B is more powerful because the O1A doesn't really have a category for recommendation letters or testimonial letters, but O1B does have one. You just need to have the right people who are willing to say some wonderful things about the work that you have done so far. And then of course there's high remuneration, the salary. We're going to talk a little bit more deeply about this in a lot of other future slides here, but don't sell yourself short, especially if you're doing freelance work. Per diem, right? If you're earning an $800 per diem for 1 day's worth of work, break that down to hourly. An 8-hour workday is actually normal. So if per diem you're earning $800, divide that by 8, you're now making $100 an hour. For a lot of graphic designers out there, in terms of like statistically, you're going to be on the top end. 100 an hour sounds like a lot. So it's all about strategy and a lot about perspective, especially with the O1B category. But this is how designers can really leverage the category here for O1B compared to others. Another very important question that a lot of people ask about the O1 is, do I need an employer, right? Because sometimes the reason why creatives can struggle with their lives here in the United States or visas in the United States is that they can't find someone to sponsor them. Nicole, I can't find a sponsor. Nobody's willing to sponsor me, or the moment that I check off the box that I need sponsorship, it's out. My resume is not going to go anywhere. So my answer to this question is sort of, kind of, but let me explain, as there's two kinds of applications. Of course, there's the traditional pathway. Apple's going to sponsor me for an O1. That's the direct employer pathway. A specific employer opts to sponsor you for the O1 application, very similar to the traditional work visas out there. But the benefit is that even if you have a direct employer for your O1, you could always transfer that O1 to a different employer if you decide to change roles. However, what I do think designers and creatives can leverage really well compared to a lot of other fields is something known as the agent petition. So what does an agent petition mean? It means that a US-based agent, essentially any US company or citizen, can sponsor you if you can prove that you will be working for multiple employers or on freelance and short-term projects. But Nicole, what is an agent, right? Guys, don't think it's a Hollywood agent, right? Like the traditional notion of a Hollywood agent, of someone who's representing you, getting new jobs, getting a cut of your income. An agent in this context is just someone who's serving as a basket. They usually charge like a $500 to $800 fee. Here at Manifest, we do work with a company known as Olive and Orient that serves as this basket. They charge a small fee, and they're the ones who sign all of the paperwork to the government. And all they're saying is that, hey, we're just saying that we represent this person for the purposes of immigration, right? But here's all of the work that they're going to be doing in the US. Because all you need to prove as a foreign national is you have multiple engagements coming up for work. And these usually come in correspondence, like, hey, I'm going to hire, let's say it's you I'm going to hire you to do some consulting work on some of these new products that I'm releasing, right? Or I have an advertising campaign and I need some graphics to be made. I'm going to have it done over the next year, right? Essentially, it gives you flexibility to be a freelancer so long as you can show that you have a lot of freelancing gigs coming up in the future. The other benefit of an agent petition for creatives is that once successful, you don't actually have to keep petitioning with the government if you have new engagements. So let's say you start an agent petition with a gig with, I'm making up companies here, a gig with a new ed tech startup where you're doing like one project for the year, and then you have another one with Meta for like one side project as a contractor. If the next day Apple shows up and says, hey, I don't want to hire you full time, but I do need some help on this project, you don't need to go back to the government and file an amendment because it is a new gig that is within your field of expertise in design. So an agent petition is a roundabout way of getting sponsorship, but you do still need to show engagements, but you don't need a direct employer per se. So is the O1 visa the best option for creatives? That's always kind of like the question that I have in mind. I will say that in my experience, it is. I think a lot of people think that the O1 can be a bit unachievable, right? I heard, Nicole, through the grapevine that it's a visa for geniuses. It's the Einstein visa, right? I need to be the designer that works for OpenAI, right? Making like the next best innovative thing. But the reality is that, take a look at the government statistics. 94% of O1s are approved. 94%, right? So what does that mean? That doesn't mean that every single person who's applying is an Einstein, right? Or is like the next generational talent in their field. What they do is they focus again on those criteria that was listed on the previous screen. What are the 3 that I can meet really healthily? And early on in your career, or at least especially when you're in your OPT period, focusing intensely on building up the evidence that you need to meet those 3 criteria. And once you meet it, you have the agent and you have future engagements for yourself. That's the math equation that needs to happen in order to get this O1 to be achieved for yourself, right? So don't sell yourself short. It's all about distinguishing yourself and meeting the criteria. And this is something that I also wanted to say to many of you, which is that the O1B has a very different standard than the O1A. Because many of you may know a lot of software engineers who are like, oh my God, the O1A is very complicated, or business people are like, oh man, this is really tough. The O1B doesn't require you to be actually at the very top of your field. The standard is that you need to have distinction in the arts. That means you are distinct from somebody else. And I know that word choice might feel very, very slim, but it is significant compared to the O1A. It's about being different. It's about being unique and being just something that is just a little bit different from like the generic pack of people who do graphic design. So focus a lot of your work on meeting those criteria. Again, really, really, really pushing people to consider freelancing in their first year because it does give us more content as lawyers when it comes to applying for the O1B in particular. So I actually have a few examples for many of you who are actually on the O1B, right? Because the reality is that when I see here, many of you may not know as a designer, what should I be doing to build up evidence, right? So how do I prove my distinction? Platforms, guys. I love Behance. I love Behance. I love when designers show me Behance because Behance has all those like likes and community awards, and there's ways to kind of really show that your work is doing really, really well or is signified as doing really well within your own design community. Dribbble is a great one. Figma community for peer validation. Likes, features, and awards can be tangible proof of recognition. I also will tell people that visualization is vital. USCIS officers are not designers, right? So use what I call a McKinsey style deck for your petition. So what do I mean by that? It's kind of like showing off your portfolio with captions. For those of you who use Figma or who use Framer and the like, sometimes it's hard to show very easily like why your work is so important, but take screenshots in the captions, explain like I'm designing an experience. When they go from one screen to another, right? This is what ends up happening. And this is what I'm trying to communicate to that user or make the user feel, right? It's about visualizing the design work that you are doing. So like I said, using screenshots and captions to explain how one user moves through an interface can prove a lot of the work that you are doing. The next thing that I would say is community and recognition. Engage in judging, right? So I know that we actually were there for like the Design Buddies demo day, but if there are any other community competitions, maybe consider applying to be a judge. If there's other design competitions out there, you never know how leverageable your skill set is to be a judge. And also one other thing I would also note is that don't hesitate to apply for international competitions as a judge, because your US-based experience might be more valuable in your home country. At least for me, like I was born in the United States, but I was raised in Indonesia. I know how leverageable my American experience is in a lot of the local competitions back home. The government doesn't reduce your evidence just because it came from a different country. So long as it's a credible competition, do it. Be a part of it or judge for it. And I would say secure independent recommendation letters. This is where being part of a wonderful community is very helpful. Talk to other people, network with other people, see if other people within this design community are willing to say, like, hey, I don't really know you, but when I think about you, for example, Min, I'm going to use you as an example, right? When I look at your career, when I look at your resume and I look at your work, you are distinctive, right? From the other market of people that I know. Those powerful testimonials are great because they're independent. They're not people who directly worked with you, but they're willing to say wonderful things about you. So strategic takeaway here is a successful petition explains what design is, not just what you did. It frames you as a specialist in a complex field, but it also visualizes it. That's why I love working with designers on their applications, is because unlike a scientist, it's really hard to visualize the work and it's actually hard to narrate the work. And I also will say to a lot of designers, you guys know more than anyone else how to communicate information in an easy and digestible way, more so than I could ever do, right? So don't hesitate to show those insights off. Don't hesitate to pour it into your application. And any good and reasonable attorney, even if you're not necessarily working with me, should be receptive to those insights. Because who am I to say how to communicate information? Who am I to say how to design that experience of someone opening your portfolio or opening your packet and understanding what makes you so distinctive? We should be opening collaborating together on these applications. So I know I talked a lot about O1s, but I wanted to at least touch upon some of the alternatives that are out there, which is for many of you who don't have the luxury of time. Nicole, I only have 1 year of OPT, or I'm talking to you now without knowing that I should have spent my time building. What are some intermediary ramps or intermediary things that I should be considering, especially if I don't win the H-1B lottery during the time that I have left? There is something known as the J1, right? The J1 visa, I know many of you who are watching this might be crying to me like, Nicole, a lot of people get denied the J1, but I'm here to talk about some of the more alternative J1s that maybe none of you have actually heard about. So there's actually 2 creative tracks for this, which is the specialist J1 and the research scholar J1. So the specialist J1 is granted to individuals who can prove that they're going to work for a company, right? To do something specialized, that you're a specialist in your own right, and you're going to advise the company or you're going to train the company on what your field does. It's actually pretty quick to get. You do need to leave the country in order to activate the J1s, but the specialist J1, it's valid for a year, and it's what I call pseudo-renewable because you can't extend it domestically in the United States, but there's nothing preventing you from leaving the country, getting another one, and coming back for another year. To a limit though, you don't want to keep renewing it forever. Then there's also the research scholar J1. And here's an interesting one, because many of you might have heard of the J1 Research Scholar because when you were in university, you might know some postdoc researchers on it, people who are in the science tracks kind of working on it. The reality is that the Research Scholar J1 is actually open to those who aren't in university. You can actually be sponsored by a private organization to do it. You could be going to work for JP Morgan. You could be working for an AI tech startup. But how do I qualify for a research scholar J1? You do need to be designing something or working towards something that is research oriented. oriented or pushing the limits of innovation. So if you are doing something like that, consider it. And you don't even need to publish research. That's another myth related to the Research Scholar J1. I have to publish something or I have to do something that is going to be very research heavy. That's not necessarily the case. And another benefit of the Research Scholar J1 is that it can be valid for up to 5 years, which is pretty extensive. It's pretty close to the amount of time that an H-1B would grant you in the long run. It is non-renewable, but there's no lottery needed. And before people come to flame me very quickly, there's also no 212E requirement or foreign residency requirement. So a lot of people get worried about the J1 because what if, Nicole, once I'm done with it, I have to leave the country, work in my home country for at least 2 years before I come back? For research scholars and specialists, I have rarely seen a 212E. The list of countries that usually have this foreign residency requirement actually significantly reduced at the end of 2024. Both China and India are no longer on that list, which is a pretty significant one. And guess what? For a J1, you can apply for it anytime in the year. Same thing as an O1. You do need a sponsor, though. You do need an employer of some format. But if you have this knowledge and you present it to the right employer and you tell them, this is actually a pretty easy visa to get, you just need to submit the fact that you're willing to engage me for this J1, the good lawyer will be the one to kind of bridge those gaps for you. But a lot of people don't realize that these are opportunities that you can utilize after your OPT period ends. So I am going to touch upon H-1Bs. And I do have to touch upon H-1Bs because it is usually the common track that a lot of people go on. And there's been a lot of changes this year, a lot of crazy headlines. I know many of you have to talk about the 100K proclamation, right? But let's just kind of touch very much on a general overview what the H-1B looks like for you guys. The H-1B visa is a specialty occupation visa that usually requires you to show that there is a company that is offering you a job that generally requires a bachelor's degree, and you have the degree to fulfill it. So to qualify in the design field, you need to have a role that requires that bachelor's degree, and you need to have some degree that is relevant to it. Let's say you're going to be a graphic designer, you should have a graphic design degree, maybe a communications degree for some of you, but it should be things that are reasonably related to the work that you're going to be doing, right? It is a lottery system. The upcoming lottery season is actually coming up upon us. It happens usually in the first 2 weeks of March. You need to have a company willing to sponsor you and enroll you during that lottery season. And you will find out if you've won that lottery in the first week of April. Historically, it's been a random drawing, but it is now shifted to a priority system that gives weight to higher wage roles. Before everybody starts to panic, oh my God, Nicole, I'm a recent graduate. I'm going to be at an entry-level scale. How am I going to get these higher wage roles? Consider applying to roles in non-metropolitan cities. I know that sounds so crazy. Like, I know that you're going to say, oh my God, I don't want to live in Idaho. I don't want to live in Iowa. I don't want to live in a lot of the states that maybe I'm not used to. But how the government determines that your wage is considered high is actually based on your geographic region. So for example, in San Francisco proper, right? Obviously, if you're a graphic designer in San Francisco, to be at the highest wage range possible might be like a $180,000 a year job, right? But that same job, if you're remote in Iowa, level 4 could be like 90K, 80K, 70K. It just kind of depends, right? So geographic location matters. Strategy does matter. So maybe consider moving out there for a little bit just to win the H-1B lottery, work for a little bit, comply with the terms of your H-1B, then change jobs back to something that would be an SF in the future. Because it doesn't apply to transfers. This weighing does not apply at all to transfers. I also want to touch more on a few more work visas very, very quickly. CAP exempt H-1Bs. So usually H-1Bs are won through lotteries, but you can actually do an H-1B without a lottery so long as you are hired by a university or a college. So if you're going to work as a designer for a university or a college, they get to apply for an H-1B for you at any time. No problem, right? Affiliated nonprofits also are exempted from the lottery requirements. So essentially, if you're going to work for a nonprofit that has an affiliation agreement with a university, they also get to skip the lottery. So think of it as like foundations and university hospitals are technically separate entities with an affiliation agreement, and also certain government research labs. So I would also mention that nonprofits that focus on research, that do applied or basic research, are also exempted from the H-1B lottery. So for many designers out there, if you can't find traditional employment with traditional employers that are out there, like private organizations, consider looking for roles at research organizations or nonprofit research organizations, because they get to skip the lottery completely. Then there's also the L1 transfer. This one is more of a bullet to hit, but can get a really good long-term gain. If you worked for a multinational company outside of the United States for 1 year, you can qualify to transfer to a related US entity in the United States. To give you an example, let's say you worked for a company like, I always mispronounce the company, but Publicis. I think it's called like Publicis, right? If you work for them and they have a French organization, you work for the French entity for a year, you can actually apply to transfer back to their New York entity or their SF entity, right? And it will net you either a 5-year visa or a 7-year visa. So that's another way to come back to the United States if that's your long-term game. And also the L1A, if you come in as an international manager, a senior executive as well, there are really great green card pathways and accelerated green card pathways for those individuals. Many of you might know consultants that work at like Bain and McKinsey. That's their strategy if they don't win the H-1B in the 3 years that they have their OPT. They just leave, work at Bain in the UK for a year, and then they transfer back to the United States. Any country-specific options that are out there, I'm also going to list. If you are Canadian or Mexican, congratulations, you have the TN visa available to you. Certain occupations like graphic designers, interior design people, industrial designers, which a lot of product designers actually fall under, you guys can actually immediately qualify for a TN visa. You just have to apply at the border if you're Canadian, or you get to apply at a consulate if you're Mexican. You will need a job offer letter to prove that you qualify for it, but it's actually a pretty quick visa to acquire. For Australians, you actually have your own version of an H-1B called the E3. You just get to go to the consulate with the required documents, and then you get to come to the United States to work for the company. For Chileans and Singaporeans, you have the H-1B1, which is a special version of the H-1B that you can apply for at any time at the consulate. All three of these require a job offer and sponsorship of some format, but I do recommend you look into these and if you are from these particular countries. So I know that I've talked a lot, but I want to make sure that a lot of you understand some tips for individuals who do freelancing and side projects. I'm going to hit these really quickly. When you're using an O1 agent, you are allowed to work for multiple engagements. It's really great for freelancers. So just to answer that quick question for many of you, if you do an O1, you can work for multiple employers so long as it's structured correctly. Again, revising the pro tip, if you are on OPT, you can use it to build out your profile. For standard OPT, self-employment and freelancing are very much allowed, but keep sure to actually document and log all of your individual projects and separate clients. For STEM OPT, you need to have a single e-verified employer. But if I could give some advice, unless you have that dream job, consider working for a design firm that has multiple engagements that you're going to be working on, rather than maybe a single employer doing in-house work, because I find that gives you the most flexibility in content and experience. Salary myths and freelance rates. Don't worry about not being paid enough. High hourly rates often place designers in the top 10% of their wage data. I think I gave the example of a per diem rate. If you're being paid $800 for a day's work, that's 8 hours. You divide it by 8, that's $100 an hour. That's pretty significant. And just a note to everybody, if you do end up on an H-1B, there is a way to do, I wouldn't say it's freelancing, but it's more like side projects. H-1Bs are generally employer specific. You can only work for one particular employer, and side projects aren't allowed. However, you can file for a concurrent H-1B. You can hold 2 jobs at once on an H-1B. You can have one 40-hour-a-week job, let's say, and one 20-hour-a-week job, or you can have multiple part-time jobs and have like up to 3 or even 4 H-1Bs concurrently at the same time, so long as the government believes that you can maintain all of those jobs within a regular work week, whether it's 40 hours a week or 60 hours a week. Don't get into the 80s. That's where they're like, there's no way you have 2 full-time jobs. Common mistakes and how to avoid them. Top 5 things that I could have every single one of you leave with. Number 1 is please don't undervalue your work. Funny enough, Min and I were talking about this before I started the presentation. I find that, especially where I grew up in Indonesia, and maybe this applies to a lot of people who are internationals, there's this culture and feeling of being modest, right? I am not the number one within my field. There's always someone who is better than me. One of the most interesting meetings that I ever did was I met someone who was very much a part of the creation or the establishment of the modern Google Cloud. And they're like, oh, you know, no big deal. I'm not an OpenAI, and I'm like, I don't even know what you're talking about, right? But don't undervalue yourself. You'd be actually surprised at how much a really great attorney can pull out of you and really showcase your work. And if we guide you in the right way, you can frame your portfolio fantastically, right? The next thing I would say is the social media mistake. Guys, inconsistent history, lack of a professional public presence can really hurt you. Don't be afraid to publicize the work that you are doing. I know there's been a lot of stuff about social media vetting. Obviously, don't do anything that's controversial. Try to avoid doing anything that would be outside of the, let's say, white and black lines of your visa category. But you should be willing to show off your work, unless it's proprietary. Don't violate any NDAs, guys. But don't hesitate to show off your work. The next thing is waiting for the perfect salary. As noted, design wage codes are actually relatively low. Don't feel like, oh my God, I don't have a 200K job a year that I'm not going to be able to argue high remuneration in the future. Just don't wait for it. I would rather that you get the experience, get the ability to showcase your work more than anything else. Next one is ignoring the lead role opportunity. Many designers will wait until they're a creative director to apply. You can actually lead a specific project much earlier in your career. I have worked with everybody who's been even the most junior of designers all the way up to being a creative strategist at Meta. The reality is that a lot of them are able to get O1s. It's just about how we present your work and the matter of perspective. Next thing that I would also say is failure to visualize. Submitting text-heavy descriptions of your visual work doesn't really help. Showcase it. Make the officer feel that your work is really, really good, right? I always say this to every designer that I've ever worked with, right? They actually have the most fun, they being USCIS, the most fun with your application. Because usually they have to deal with a lot of the regular STEM researchers who are like, here's my stack of abstracts of every journal that I've ever published in. But designers get to show off something that's much more visually pleasing. So lean into that because it's much more fun for them to review it. We have former USCIS officers on our staff, and they tell us all the time, like they love the O1B applications way more than the O1As because it's more fun, right? It's more fun to review compared to the O1A. So lean heavily on that. But yeah, that kind of concludes the very quick presentation that we have, trying to squeeze in as much content. There's a great reason why this is being recorded because you can probably watch this at half the speed if you need to and stop at the slides that are the most important. But I want to make sure that I leave enough room for every single one of you to ask any questions if possible. And also we did send out a survey before this call. So let's see if we can answer some questions that were submitted through that survey.
Perfect. Thank you for such an insightful presentation. And we have a lot of questions from the audience. We can start with the ones on YouTube. Yeah. So the first question is, would pursuing a content creator path helps with the O1 application?
Yes. So this is what I love about, I was about to say 2025 since we just got into 2026, but let's say this is what I love about 2026, right? Is that nowadays, a lot of my younger clients, I feel like they've taken control over their own careers, right? And the reason why they're able to take control is because look at how much social media has become pervasive, right? Being a content creator actually gives you so much flexibility. I am pushing out my own content. I am kind of pushing out my own publicity, and it can rapidly grow very, very quickly. So for many of you who are out there, if you're a content creator, it actually can really, really help your odds when it comes to achieving the O1 because it's self-published. You push it yourself. Quick note, this is just random, not really associated with design, but there's actually really, really good headlines recently about how so many people on OnlyFans have gotten O1Bs. If an OnlyFans creator can do it, many of you who do a lot of design content definitely can get an O1B as well.
Okay, lovely. Okay, the next question is from YouTube. Let me see. So what are like the top 3 design projects worth pursuing if like I'm currently job hunting?
Top 3 design projects. I'm like thinking to myself based on like my experience. So I will say that I've actually had a lot of success of people putting themselves up for Fiverr. I know, right? So I don't have a specific project, but I'll say like you go on Fiverr, you list yourself as somebody who's willing to do like design work for X amount of money for each, right? You'd actually be surprised at how many like high level companies actually use Fiverr to quickly get projects done, right? So I guess that's an example of one thing that you can do. But other design specific projects, like it's hard for me to label because I think that's such a broad thing to ask for. But maybe taking a step back, don't hesitate to work for a startup, especially if they just got their first round of funding. Startups actually rapidly grow very quickly and can become distinguished organizations or organizations and productions in their own right. And also don't hesitate to even reach out to the big companies if they're looking for contractor help in your freelancing gig.
Nice. Okay. Lovely. Hope that's answered the question. And then the next question is from LinkedIn. Is there anything that I need to know as a J2 visa holder who already has an EAD? What is an EAD like?
Yeah, so an EAD is an employment authorization document. Basically, it's like a wide blanket work authorization that allows you to work for any company that you want, or even multiple companies, let alone even own a business, right? You usually can get an EAD card through being a spouse. So in this case, a J2 is a spouse of someone who's on a J1, or you can get EAD cards even from your OPT. So when you apply for OPT, what you actually apply for is an EAD card, although OPTs have rules related to it. That being said, for you, this person who's asking me about the J2 EAD, remember that you're on a dependent status. So that the moment that your primary spouse's J1 expires, you lose your ability to get work authorization. So leverage the fact that you on a J2 EAD can work for whoever you want to work for. Freelancing could be a great way to get in touch with many different employers that are out there to build up very quickly on the O1. So while you have the time left, do as much work as possible. Get those connections that you need. Go back to my slide or on this recording, go back to the slide with all the criteria, start targeting the criteria that fits you the most, and then go from there.
Nice. Okay, hope that answered your question. And then another question from Safay is, what about a business degree, let's say like BBA with a minor in communication studies? I'm not exactly sure what the question is about.
I think they might have asked that question in the slide when it has to do with O1A versus O1B, perhaps, right? Like, because it's like O1As are targeted more for business individuals and O1Bs are more for creative individuals. In the O1 context, the government doesn't care what degree you have. They don't care about what degree you have. What they care about is what are you going to be doing in the United States? Like, what is your area of extraordinary achievement? If it's more in a creative endeavor, you go down the creative pathway. If it's more in the business side of things, it's on the business side of the pathway, right? I will continue to maintain that designers have a great flexibility to go either or. I've seen product designers, UI, UX designers, graphic designers argue for either or. It's a thing. Just do what fits best for you. And if it's related to the H1B, then I would say it depends on the role that you're being offered. Your degree just needs to line up with whatever role you're being offered at that time.
Okay. Next question. How can we know which companies are sponsoring TN visas?
This is actually a great question, and I have a good insight on that. Instead of searching online like TN visa companies, right? 2 signifiers of a company that is more willing than not to do a TN. Number 1 is if they have a multinational presence in either Mexico or Canada. Usually because they have that multinational presence, they're more aware of these visas, especially when they're coming to the United States. The second is there's a website known as H1B Grader. Hear me out. I know that this is not about H-1Bs, right? But you can actually look up a company to see how many H-1Bs they filed in like the last decade. If they've even sponsored one or two individuals, that means that that company is familiar with immigration. So that's a really good start in terms of determining whether or not they would be willing or able to seek a TN, because they have some familiarity with doing US immigration.
Okay. I think the last question I see is, can someone apply for O1B visa as a designer from other country? Which I assume yes.
Yes, you can be outside of the United States. You don't have to be in the United States to apply for an O1. You could be somebody who's never even been to the United States and apply for an O1.
Okay. Nice. I think that's all we have from the chat, but we can move on to like the questions people submit on the Luma registration.
Yeah, for sure. I have a few of them right here, and we'll talk about
it. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, take it
away. Yeah, so can you be eligible for O1 if your work experience mostly involves freelance work? 100%. I think I've been echoing this like crazy throughout the whole presentation. I love O1 people with freelance work because I have more content to work with, right? They do reward productions, they do reward those engagements. But at the end of the day, if you have really great employers, don't disregard it just because I'm very pro freelance. Nothing can take away the fact that if you're a creative strategist at Meta, you're a creative strategist at Meta. If you're a lead designer at Apple, you're a lead designer at Apple, right? At the end of the day, that's helpful too, but freelance work is great. It can be very helpful for an O1. Next one that we got from the survey is, have you worked with clients who are designers and have gotten the EB1? I have seen PMs do it, but not too many designers, and that got me curious if there's something I am missing. So for many of you who are joining today or realize that I didn't talk about the EB1 at all, EB1A, which I think is what they're referencing, is like the bigger brother of the O1. It's the bigger brother in the sense that you get a green card out of it rather than a work visa. And the reason why you don't see a lot of designers get an EB1A is because even though it's the bigger brother of the O1, the EB1A does lean much more favorably to non-creatives. It's because when they mushed the O1A requirements and the O1B requirements together to create the EB1A, I felt like the criteria that they selected are not conducive to most designers. So for example, there's a category called exhibition of like your work, right? And that exhibition, they mean like art galleries. Like, I'm not really sure how the normal designer is going to be putting up their work in these art galleries in a way. There's also commercial success in the performing arts, but performing arts is not the same as design, right? So that's probably the reason why you haven't seen that many people get the EB1A. However, there are some designers who have gotten that. A key example is that they usually target the awards category, the press category, the judging category, and also the memberships category. Those are the main categories that designers seem to really do well in, because memberships, for example, there's an organization called TopTal, TOPTAL. They like basically do a lot of review, and like maybe the top 1% or 5% of designers make it into that organization. So do consider that. But yeah, it's possible, but I can see that it is a little bit harder compared to, say, the traditional scientists in achieving the EB1A. Can you talk through the OPT, STEM OPT to O1 visa transition? So I did touch upon it in today's presentation, gave a lot of insights about what people should be doing and building. But I will tell you that my personal experience has been, hey, do freelance on the OPT, do formal work on the STEM OPT, go into the O1 with so much content, right? That transition requires you to file for the O1 before the end of your STEM OPT. I would say the earlier, the better. I usually prefer people do the O1 visa transition 2 years into their full OPT timeline. Sorry, OPT STEM OPT timeline. But I digress, it depends on each person. But do rewind onto this video to see if you can find the stuff that I'm talking about for the O1, because I think that's a lot of helpful content in terms of what you should be doing on your OPT and your STEM OPT. And that's actually my last slide. So Min, do you want to kind of go through the Luma questions? Because I know there were a lot more. We just picked like the top 4 in the interest of time before. you're muted, Min.
I think this is the one that haven't been touched on yet. What kind of work experiences do you need to have before applying for a work visa in general?
Oh, so if let's say you are in school at the moment, you're on your F1, you're on your sophomore or your junior year, you could do CPT in order to get internship experience because you're allowed to get work experience while you're in school. Golden rule though is don't exceed or don't reach 365 days of full-time CPT while you're in school, or internship time, let's call it, because then you can't get your OPT once you graduate. And that also means you can't get your STEM OPT. But there's no explicit requirement in any of the work visas to actually have experience, right? It's just that obviously if you want to be able to prove that you're somebody of extraordinary ability, it would be kind of strange to apply without having ever worked professionally in your life. So I would say just do some work, do a little bit of work. Internships can help in at least the networking part of the conversation.
I think these are pretty much answered throughout the slides. So I think we should be good. And we have only 1 minute left for the stream.
Yeah.
And like, I think the question that they asked earlier is, would the slides be available after the stream ends?
Sure. So I think what the team here can do at Manifest is we'll share it with you, Min. And if you want to kind of distribute it to the listserv, or if there's a way for us to distribute it, we're happy to do that as well.
Okay, cool. I think that's it. Thank you so much, Nicole, for such an insightful talk. And definitely, I took a lot of notes. So yeah. Thank you everyone for tuning in, asking a lot of great questions, and we shall end the stream here, and hope everyone have a good day and work on your 2026 designer resolution and building a career as an international worker.
All right. Take care, guys. Thank you for having me, Min.
See ya. Okay, let me end the stream.